Good morning. Welcome to Creatacast with your host, David Welch. And to my writing army out there, I salute you. And the reason I say writing army instead of writing community is that there are literally different ways we can categorize the writing community in a very rank and file way. Not so much that there is superiority in naming the writing community an army, but the different talents and the different ways we bring victory to literacy is what I mean. We have those who write simple children's fiction, which is hard to actually do. It's actually easier for me to write a complex story than it is to pen a children's book. And those who do that, especially those who, like Dr. Seuss, created a trend in children's literature, I applaud you. You have the toughest task of all, getting young, minds to enjoy reading. But we have a varied background of writers and experiences and types of writing that gets done. I'd say those who write poetry are your snipers. They are those who often arrive in pairs to do damage to specific hearts. And that's what ends up happening with poetry, is they're so laser focused on the entire community, they don't realize that they're picking off the most hardened hearts of the writing community. There are some people who flat out don't read, they abhor reading, and they just would rather watch a film, which is okay. I mean, the film has its place in the art community for sure. And the writing behind most films is superb, and it's the writing that really carries the day, the story, the format. I digress. And then we have the sci-fi writers, those who write sci-fi. I'd say those are our infantry, because I'd say the vast readership of the world dabbles in, at least this stage of the game, sci-fi. Because we love the future. We love the concept of the future. We love technology that hasn't been invented yet. We love working in the realm of theory and aliens. Sorry, my son's eating right here. Here you go, baby. I already had some. Good. Okay. So here's what I mean. And then we have genre fiction, which I would say would be like our army component. If science fiction makes up the bulk of our infantry, the rest of the standing army would be genre fiction. Historical fiction, I would say, belong to the Air Force. Because every once in a while, they drop tremendous bombs from great heights. Nonfiction, I would say, they have some of the hardest jobs. So I would say if the Air Force is the historical fiction community, then nonfiction would be akin to a special unit. They'd be very specific, like there'd be like the paratroopers coming in. They have a very specific way of getting behind enemy lines of literacy and bringing truth to the fold. Laura Hillenbrand would be their general. Okay, she'd be chief among them. So, but what I'm saying is you can just liken the speciality You could even just do it straight special forces, the different type of special forces, and then categorize each writing community. Romance, I'm sorry to say, you guys are the Marines. You guys go after the toughest and are the baddest content writers out there. Because, and here's what I mean. Believe it or not, a large majority of the readership of the United States is romance. Whether it's fantasy romance, Western romance, whatever it is, romance is the key. Romance wins the day. They have the toughest battles to fight, and they're the hardest to get into. They are the most regimented. So, if you want to talk about supernatural fiction and horror, that would be the Navy. The horror writers, the mystery writers, they would make up the bulk of the Navy, because those stories transcend. Here you go, baby. Those stories transcend the ocean. Mystery is a mystery damn near everywhere, and showcases locations around the globe that are fraught with inquiry, that are fraught with large-scale thinking and problem solving. Problem solving is universal. So horror fiction, the ability for suspense belongs, I would say, the Navy. Because being out on that water, slicing through waves and the ocean above Lord knows what, is scary. Can be. If you think about it long enough, think about it hard enough, yeah, it could be terrifying. But in the terror, we find enjoyment. I was in the Navy for 5 years. I would not take back a single moment. Even the hard ones, even the ones I didn't like, I wouldn't take those back. Would I make a different decision as a young man to get out and go to college? Probably not, but, that was the decision I made. That's what I stuck with. I'd be 4 years out of retirement, 4 years close to retirement if I'd have stayed in. Probably be an E7, but, I'm not going to quibble over what ifs and, those salty dreams. I had my time, and, I could, explore that mentality for a long time. But the journey I've taken since leaving the military has been amazing as well. Tough. I've had a lot of personal setbacks, but that's okay. I've also had a lot of personal successes, and that's what I'm talking about is experience. One of the letters that I received back as a young man when I was 23 was from Michael Curtis Ford, and I was blown away. It was a letter in an email form, but I was blown away by his response. He said you had to experience. You had to go out and experience life in order to articulate it well. He's not lying. There's a lot of young writers out there in the writing community, and they have the mechanics, they have the creative brain, and they're performing at a high rate because we grew up on Harry Potter. We stand on the shoulders of the writing community that came before us. Stephen King, Dean Koontz, J.K. Rowling, so many prolific writers. If you want to go back to, Rudyard Kipling, you have so many, writers and poets and, everybody we stand on. We're expected to carry the torch. We have larger platforms now, thank God. We have blogs, we have Medium, we have like Inkjet, we have MyPad, Wattpad, we have WordPress, we have so many writing outlets. But don't forget your own notebooks. Don't forget your the little writing pads you carry with you to keep notes, because you're a journalist in the grand scheme of things. You write down information, even if it's a checkoff list. It is your personal tome of writing. It is personal and unique to you. Other people looking at it would be like, whoa, it's like reading hieroglyphics. What are they talking about? But the fantastic part is that there is a mind behind those scribblings. There is a beautiful brain that you beautiful bastards have. And sorry, Mr. DeFranco, I stole that bit, but you guys are amazing. That's why I like calling you my writing army, because you guys are out there. They're in the trenches. You're writing with your characters. You are building landscapes and worlds and universes we haven't yet looked into, but we can't wait to do so. So those of you in the writing community who are in the trenches, you're working on your stories, you're working on your poems, you're working on your dreams to become a prolific writer. Just because it takes you 10 years to do so, or 15 years to do so, or 20 or 30 years to do so, doesn't mean you don't bring something to the table. If you see somebody's book out there and it's published, understand that that's no simple feat, and it's years and years and years of learning, progress, and commitment to a craft. Whether or not you are deemed the best at your craft, sometimes it's not even the best writing that makes and changes the world. Honestly, when I read Twilight, that to me wasn't the best writing in the world, but the story, the mind behind the story, forever altered people's way of being, and it related very well to angsty teenagers, and it performed out of its brain. I think, had that book been written in the 90s, maybe it wouldn't have gotten as thorough of a response. But the fact that it did, when it did, is exactly when it was supposed to. So if you've been at the game for years, even if you're in your 60s and 70s, like Mr. Stanley, and you are retired, and then you come out swinging with 30 years of comic book stories and creating new worlds for people to live in, and now be able to finally see in film, then you have that capability in you. I love to liken people's journey to a marathon instead of a sprint, because in a marathon you have 26 miles of running, 26, I think it's 26.2 miles of a race, and a lot of people are still at the first 8 hours of the race, or hours, I would say 8 miles of the race. Sorry about the missed analogy there. But keep riding, keep running the race. It behooves you to do so. Keep pushing forward, and you're going to create, like I said, the mountains and move mountains in the literacy world. Here's what I mean. Those who are not reading now may have not found what they wanted to read yet. For me, it was conning. I was in the airport. I was going to my first school in the military. And Connie Golden's book, Emperor Rise to Rome, happened to be the book that changed the game for me. It got me into reading historical fiction, and it got me into reading 80 plus books of deployment. My son's having a ball over there with my wife. But yeah, so that's what ends up being the paradigm shift. That's what ends up being the countless hours of work you put in. Because Connor Golden's been writing for a long time, him and his brother. They have crazy concepts. They came up with the Dangerous Book for Boys, which is amazing. So even if it sounds goofy to you at the moment, run with it. Run with that writing. Run with that character. Run with that storyline. Sometimes the manuscript you have in the back is the one that gets picked up and applauded and lauded as a great achievement. Even though your baby, the one you've been cranking out for a long time, and the one that is your best project you believe in your heart, may not be the best well-received one. And that's okay. Have those manuscripts in your back pocket. Have 10 manuscripts in your back pocket. That way you can say, you know what, hey, I have not just that book, I have 9 others ready to go. Because I live, eat, and breathe the writing community. I live solely for the pen and the pad. And a lot of people are so camped out in front of computers and devices all day anyway that it's unfathomable to have something in the works and ready to publish. Whether it's a short story, I mean, there are contests almost every day, when it comes to the writing community. So keep writing. Make it a daily habit to do at least one short story, one poem, and at least 5 chapters. You would be amazed at what you can achieve. For me, it's simple. 1 poem, 1 short story, 5 chapters. And bam, next thing you know, you've got your book churned out. You've got, your work accepted at a contest or a conference. Don't forget the academic community and those who are essayists. You are not lost or missed in this conversation because you are profound. You carry the day. Those who are the philosophical writers, those who are deep, deep, deep thinkers, we need you. We have you with apps like Gaia. We have you integrating your philosophy and art into Medium and other platforms that you can benefit from. WordPress. And don't think your value is lost on the American people. It's not. You belong in a subset of the writing community and the writing army. So keep carrying the day, keep marching forward, and you will change the world on your own. There are people who write essays so well that it doesn't even appear like you're reading an essay because you enjoy the writing so much. Because people have personality, they have flair, and one of the biggest boons, I think, to somebody's ego in relation to their writing is if they appear on the outside like someone who's never said a profound thing in their life. And I was taken aback as a young man, especially when I was in high school, as some of the levels of writing my peers had when I thought they were, I didn't think much of them. I hear you, Bubba. When I didn't think much of them, they ended up being the most profound influencers of my high school and then college career. So those who I didn't believe were, the brightest bulbs in the box ended up being the champions in college. Those who you think are nerds or geeks or whatever in high school right now, if you belong to that category, just know college is a different ball field altogether. In college, you have that academic freedom. You have that space to become a very powerful entity. And then the freedoms of being an adult on top of that. Even if you're not an adult, even if you're a minor in college, if you're 16, 17, you're listening to this podcast, you're in college, and you're like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I just go to class and, knock out the homework and I'm good to go. What am I contributing? But that's not the mentality you should be walking with. You're carrying a big freaking stick. And here's how. You are in college. You are allowed. You have a duty to express your mind. You have a duty to express your art. You have a duty to put yourself out there in the most extreme possible format because that is recognized, appraised, and valued in college. In high school, not so much. Sometimes you fall under a very strict social order in high school, and unfortunately that's the way it is for a lot of students. But if you branch out in college, you become transformative. And there are some high schoolers that are doing this right now who, transcend their area. You'll have a jock that's also in choir, who's also has the ability to play instruments, who has the ability to read and write and play Dungeons and Dragons and turn around and kill someone on the football field or on the football pitch, whatever you wanted to call it, whatever realm you're listening in. So there are those who are the happy warriors. And we're seeing more and more of this trend in communities everywhere where you have the warrior academic. In fact, that's, I think, the pinnacle of the Renaissance, man. And that's something Plato said too. You can't go through life without understanding the beauty of your physical attributes, understanding reaching the pinnacle of what you're physically capable of doing. And you can do that whilst being an academic. I know guys that are on scholarship right now for wrestling, football, swimming, whatever sport they play, and they are prolific academics as well. They strive to achieve in the classroom. But that's not the end all be all. I was a freaking B student in college. I was a B student. I was an A student in graduate school. Finally, I didn't get to be an A student until I was already in graduate school. And then and that's okay. I was wrestling in college. I was working in college. I was in the National Guard in college. If you got things going on in college and you squeak out with a B average, then consider yourself a freaking titan. And that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean you can't contribute to the world at large. You still hold your degree, you still have it conferred, and you've achieved a great milestone. But that's not the end of your learning. That's why they call doctoral learners lifelong learners, because they end up being one. Graduate school for a lot of people is the pinnacle of their success, which is okay. Nothing wrong with that. If you move past graduate school and you get to a doctoral program and you're doing your dissertation, or you're 3 years into your doctoral program and you're worried your dissertation is not going to have merit in that community, that's okay. You're spending a lot of money and you're striving to make an inch in that academic conversation. And that's okay. There are a lot of people who don't ever crest that pinnacle, but the fact that you're climbing Everest, the academic Everest, and you're ahead of the game, and you're, coming out swinging as a young person, but then end up faltering, fall back down the hill a little bit, that doesn't mean you can't turn around at an older age and crest Everest, and hit the peak. And that's what happens to people. Some people, they're in the trenches. Some people are blue collar. They're pipe fitters. They're, working with their hands all day. And that doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. That doesn't, like, my grandfather is a good example of this. He was a mechanic, super smart, highly well-read individual. And, but from the outside looking in, you got this, barrel of a man whose giant red beard and massive forearms would offset anybody. You look at him, you're like, wow, this guy is a freaking Viking in, modern era. But he was also the most gentle soul you could ever have a conversation with. He was a great conversationalist, super smart, super funny, and, a highly remarkable individual. And he was, and this is what I found out recently when I was talking to my Aunt Barbara, is that he was also a prolific writer. He wrote a lot. He wrote letters to myself, my brothers in the Navy, and I thought that was like, okay, well, he's doing some writing, but the way he crafted his words, the way he crafted stories, I guess he used to keep notebooks of storytelling when he was young. I wish to goodness I had all those notebooks. I'd put them and get them out there, but I don't. And I'm going to turn his letters to me and my brothers in the Navy, and Andrew, when Andrew was in high school and right out of high school, I'm going to turn those letters into a book, into a novelization of that journey. So there's always a story to tell, always a pinnacle to be reached, and just keep doing what you're doing. If you're writing fiction right now, and you're working on, or you're writing a poetry book or whatever have you, it's not just for your benefit. It's for the benefit of others. Us who write for our readers, and I don't care if you believe your readers are going to be adults one day. You may be a fan, or you may hit it off with youngsters. When I read Twilight, that wasn't really meant for the teeny boppers. That was really meant for an adult community. who ended up reading it, but also it was enjoyed by teenagers who really set the tone. You know, Ender's Game. Ender's Game was meant to be a very steadfast scientific or science fiction, but it was very well received. It's very well received by high schoolers. People in high school love that series, you know, because those are kids in action. We missed that. You know, growing up in the 90s, we had a lot of young protagonists who were powerful. And here's what I mean. You have Macaulay Culkin's Home Alone character. You have the Three Ninjas. You have Surf Ninjas. You have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You have so many characters that are in their teens, that are in high school, that are... And I mean, look at the young X-Men. Look at all the DC Titans, you know, and to empower young people is what it's all about. You know, when reading Hatchet as a kid by Gary Paulson was prolific. It was phenomenal for me to read, and it empowered me. Reading Goosebumps and having kids battle the supernatural elements of the Goosebumps universe is empowering. You know, it's what you do with your book and how you're portraying things is going to set the tone and be amazing for someone to read one day. And sometimes we need a good noir. We do. Those who write noir and live in that genre, you have a place. Don't think that your book's not well received because it doesn't end like everybody expects it to. Fuck that. It ends the way you want it to end. It ends the way you expect it to end because you wrote it that way. Noir has its place. Sometimes we need to walk away with the good guys not winning, or not winning the way we think they should win. I mean, if anyone's ever watched Rogue One, they know, like, hey, you expect this fantastic outcome by these great characters you're introduced to, only to realize that it doesn't end the way you want it to end. You're like, what you're left with a sense of like, damn, I was so invested, but it didn't play out the way I wanted it to. Same way of Game of Thrones. Anyone who's watched Game of Thrones and your favorite character died, well, that motherfucking shit was orchestrated. You know, George R. R. Martin, that fantastical gray-bearded man, is the arbiter and the death bringer of a lot of favorite characters that you have. And that's okay. I love when my characters do something unexpected. Or even the villains do something that the protagonist doesn't expect, and it comes from left field. I mean, when I was younger, Tall Tale was a very prolific movie for me, because you have these fantastical characters living in this dreamscape of this kid, and they're morphed into reality. Not just that, but you have the villains in the dream, and you have the villain in reality who is pure evil, and they have evil intentions, and you can liken it to whatever you want to, because there's analogous things to liken that to. So, and you know it's a noir because in the end you live in the progress, you live in the future of that time setting, and understand that the villain is right. You can't stop progress. It came whether they wanted it to or not. You know, it came to that valley. It's probably very modern. I mean, you could just imagine that future saying, oh shit, well, the villain ended up winning because somebody, and he was right, somebody somewhere is going to come and try and do the same thing, and they did. So progress won't be halted everywhere. Now, there is a small island where there are natives who will kill you if you come on their island. Progress is stopped wholesale there, but that's okay. But in the writing community, we have an obligation to keep doing what we're doing. We have an obligation to build each other up, and that's why I love Twitter. Because I see and am empowered by so many writers doing the dang thing. Even if you're a Twitter writer in name only, you are doing a service to those who are in the trenches, because they need that encouragement. They need to see that somebody else is also working to get their books out, whether it's self-published, major published. You know, you've got query letters out for all 5 of your dang novels, and it's not getting well received. That's okay. That's okay. I got a stack of rejection letters up to the roof with my manuscript, with my short stories, with my poetry. Who cares? Who the fuck cares? Keep doing what you do. Maybe right now in this time period, your work's not well received. But in the future, who knows? In the future, your books, your stories, your poetry, your nonfiction, your essays may alter the way of thinking for the globe, for the universe. Right now, you could be the geekiest geek and say, hey, I'm science fiction to the max. I explain things in terms that people don't quite understand, but I'm living in it. People who hear nebula, nanobot, quantum physics, quantum reality, people don't have a concept for what that is. But you do, and you live in it. You have an audience because there are people who are as nerdy, as geeky, and as interested in learning as you are. So keep battling, keep fighting, keep shooting for that high mark and that benchmark of your Everest. And it's a marathon. Don't stop running the race just because you're not received as a young person. That doesn't mean you can't come back as an older person, a little bit more educated, a little learned, a little experienced, and blow the socks off the writing community. It happens. There are people who write as a young person, don't get recognized, come back as an older person and release amazing novels that people are just dying to read. It happens. Sometimes it takes a lot of learning. I know a lot of people who are like, well, it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily need to be educated to write well. You don't. No, there are people who have a high school education that write amazing novels, that have produced great work. It's not about what station you're at in life. And there are athletes out there that are more than capable of writing, that have more than the ability to just be readers and brutes and, the happy warriors that we love them to be. Just because a guy fights in a cage doesn't mean he's not profound enough to produce a novel, to produce a great work of poetry. You don't know. You don't know what the hell is behind that visage, that leather skin, that cauliflowered ear. I mean, imagine how many college wrestlers are in college and have degrees and speak multiple languages and, are off conquering the world, doing different things, and they have cauliflower ear. A lot of people look at them and like, man, you're this physical specimen who's, can maul somebody if need be. But they don't. Of course they're not going to. Of course they're not violent. They have controlled violence. But that controlled violence is also a dedication to a craft and focus, which is exactly what writing is. It's a dedication to a craft and it's high focus. So I'm going to leave that with you guys. I want to let you guys ruminate on what I've said this morning. Right now I haven't read any work because I haven't had submissions. I do need submissions. Please submit to Creatacast so I can read your work. Oh, and I do have to say there was a winner for the 2018 Greatest Poem by Realistic Poetry, and then the First Poem of the Year award has already been awarded, I do believe, by Realistic Poetry. Please go to them, realisticpoetry.com, become a member, check them out on Twitter, and contribute. I'm also going to give a shout out to, I think it's Inklight, who has a great format of connecting writers. And again, Speaker Studio. Please, 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 if you want to start a podcast, get it going. You have the ability. So, those who are in the trenches, keep writing. Please submit to dwelch9627@gmail.com. I look forward to your submissions. 10 pages, Times New Roman, 12-point font. Double spaced if you're a fiction writer, an essay writer, or creative nonfiction, poetry. Please keep it to 10 pages. Separate your poems, and that way I can read them in their entirety. If you want your words coming out of your mouth, then please submit an audio clip with that. With your submission, please include a bio, just a brief cursory information about you so I can talk about you on there and get you out there. I appreciate you. Have a great day, writing community. Signing out.